Sounds alarming. Good afternoon. My name is Adina Langer, and on behalf of the Museum of History and Holocaust Education, I would like to welcome you to this opening performance for Words, Music, Memory, representing Voices of the Holocaust. If you wouldn't mind taking this moment to silence your cell phones, tuck them away. Everyone should have a program, so you'll be able to follow along with the concert, and we can have subtitles that will help you see what the singers are singing. So you are in for something special today because you are going to be a part of a live commemoration, an event that will only ever happen exactly this way once. Words, Music, Memory is animated by the idea of commemoration as a process involving witness, preservation, interpretation, performance, and appreciation. This process builds bridges between the past and the present and connects generations to each other. Before we continue, I'd like to take this opportunity to acknowledge those of you in the audience who have a direct personal connection to the events we are commemorating today. Among us today, we have Holocaust survivors and witnesses to Nazi occupation. We have family members of resistance fighters and family members of World War II veterans. Please feel free to stand up or raise your hand so we can honor you. The performance you will witness this afternoon is the culmination of a process that began in 2019. But the seeds were planted almost 20 years ago when Sheena Ramirez and I met as freshmen at Oberlin College. She was following her passion for singing, and I was exploring my passions for history and creative writing. We discovered the synergy of our interests when Sheena invited me to help her interpret the poetry she was preparing to perform in her recitals of art songs. Our artistic partnership continued after graduation, as year after year, I looked forward to the opportunity to talk about what made poets write and what made poetry sing. Fast forward to the winter of 2019, when Sheena invited me to help her prepare for her third graduate recital at James Madison University. This time, the poet was a young victim of the Holocaust, and my experience as a curator allowed me to offer more insights into the circumstances of this teenager's short life and the astonishing fact that her poetry survived at all. And here we were, more than 60 years later, breathing new life into her words. Why not do an exhibit about the performance of Holocaust poetry? Why not make this the topic of a dissertation? The seeds were planted, but the project here at KSU would not have come to fruition without our very own composer in residence, Dr. Laurence Sherr. Dr. Sherr's identity as a Holocaust remembrance composer and researcher into the music of resistance and survival is also deeply rooted in his passions. When he embraced his love of klezmer and explored his family's connections to the Holocaust, his career as a composer and scholar flourished. The concert you are about to experience brings together the words of poets who witnessed the Holocaust, interpreted by composers and performers, and witnessed again by all of you. Sheena Ramirez will take you on a journey through the Holocaust compositions of Laitman, and Dr. Sherr will introduce you to the poetry of resistance. This act of commemoration is a microcosm for what we explore in the traveling exhibit, where each panel includes words of witness, artist illustrations, and profiles of preservation, interpretation, and performance. The commemoration we create here together will join the others showcased in the exhibit's digital gallery guide, which I invite you to explore at your leisure. But now, without further ado, I'm excited to welcome Sheena Ramirez to the stage.
Thank you for joining us on a journey of memory today. In the course of this concert, you will hear the words of witnesses of the Holocaust. These stories can be difficult to hear and even harder to bear knowing the fate of many of the authors. The victims whose words we will be sharing created poetry in order to comprehend their situation, whether it was in the moment or many years later. The poems were then selected and interpreted through music by composer Laitman, who has made it her mission to give a voice to those who were silenced in the Holocaust. In doing so, through the generous support of commissioners and the careful preparation of performers, you as an audience member will see unfold before you a multifaceted tapestry of interpretation. Through this layering of the arts, poetry, composition, and performance, the act of witnessing takes on a deeper meaning. Laitman comes from a musical family, and her talent was first channeled through piano and flute. At the age of 16, she was admitted to Yale, where she earned both a bachelor's and a master's in performance. She dabbled in composition courses and even worked for a film scoring company after graduation, but put her performance ambitions on hold to start a family. At 36, and as a mother of 3 young children, she was approached by her Interlochen roommate, soprano Lauren Wagner, who was planning her debut album and wanted Laurie to compose a song for it. After much deliberation, Laurie agreed, and thus found her true calling as an art song composer. The signature quality of Laurie's music is her attention to the text. She's a skilled word painter, treating the poems as baby films with unique colors provided by her sometimes unusual instrumentation choices. Her songs are tonal, and her style has been described as lavish, nuanced, and achingly beautiful. To date, Laurie has composed over 250 songs, and as a part of that catalog, she has written 10 song cycles, 1 opera, and 1 oratorio to commemorate victims of the Holocaust. The first such commemoration came about through Lauren Wagner, again, who in 1996 approached Laurie about composing a song cycle based on the poems from I Never Saw Another Butterfly. 21 years later, soprano Christine Hertzweizcheck approached her about a sequel, which culminated in The Secret Exit, set to the text of Nelly Sachs. Portions of these 2 cycles will be presented here today. In 1941, Nazi Germany converted the Czech town of Terezín, also known by its Austro-Hungarian title Theresienstadt, into a Jewish ghetto. Unlike most of the other European way stations, Terezín served the Nazi propaganda machine and was showcased as a model ghetto, a simulated retirement community for elderly and high-profile European Jews. The fortified status of the city, with high barrack walls in the shape of a star, made escape impossible. In peacetime, the city was built to hold a little over 5,600 citizens. Jewish prisoners were first brought in 1941, and in the final months of the war, a wide variety of people from all over Europe inhabited the city, containing on average 45,000 people at any given time. Of the 144,000 total inmates who passed through Terezín, 88,000 were transported to other concentration camps, and 33,000 died within the city walls. There were only 17,247 survivors when the camp was liberated in 1945. 15,000 children were also housed in Terezín, of which only 100 survived. The children expressed themselves through writing poetry and drawing on any scrap of paper they could get their hands on. One of their teachers, Friedel Dicker Brandeis, collected over 4,500 of their works in 2 suitcases before she was deported to Auschwitz, and miraculously, the pieces survived. Some of the artwork and poems were published under the title, I Never Saw Another Butterfly, taking its title from Pavel Friedman's The Butterfly, which is included in Laurie Laitman's song cycle. She also set 2 poems by front to boss, The Old House and the Garden, an anonymously written poem, Bird's Song, and 2 poems, Man Proposes, God Disposes, and Yes, That's the Way Things Are, which were written by a trio of young boys who wrote under the pen name Koleba, an acronym for Miroslav Kosek, Hannes Lowy, and Bochner. All five of the known authors were deported to Terezin in 1942 and died in Auschwitz in 1944. I would like to read the final poem of the cycle, The Old House by Franz Bass. Deserted here, the old house stands in silence, asleep. The old house used to be so nice before. Standing there, it was so nice. Now it is deserted, rotting in silence. What a waste of houses, a waste of hours.
It was so nice
Nothing, nothing. You just heard When in Early Summer, the second of 3 songs included in Laurie's setting of The Secret Exit. The poem contrasts the wonders of nature with the inhumanity of man. The author was Nellie Sachs, 1966 Nobel Prize winner for literature and Holocaust survivor. Nellie grew up in high society Berlin in the shadow of World War I, raised agnostic and unconnected to her Jewish heritage. She lived a sheltered life alone with her mother, and it was through her connections with author Selma Lagerlöf that she managed to secure spots on the last flight out of Germany to Sweden in 1940, a week before their scheduled departure date to report to a concentration camp. She spent the rest of her days in Sweden and struggled greatly after the death of her mother, so much so that she was committed to a mental asylum for the last decade of her life due to her depression and persecution paranoia. Her recognition as an author came late in life, and when she accepted the Nobel Prize in 1966, she famously remarked, "I represent the tragedy of the Jewish people." The author of the next song cycle, Anne Renasinga, was also a Holocaust survivor. Born Annalise Katz, she was the sole survivor from her family after her parents sent her to England at age 13 following the atrocious events of Kristallnacht in 1938. She married a man from Ceylon and spent the rest of her life in Sri Lanka, raising a family of 7 children, only turning to poetry in the late 1960s. Like so many Holocaust survivors, Renasinga's creative output tries to come to terms with her past. The theme of her body of work has been described as the thin, fragile line between the past and present, between forgetting and remembering. The 4 poems Laurie set have the subtitle 4 Stanzas on Mortality, and with precise and exquisite language, examine the relationship between time and death. I would like to read the first poem of the cycle for you now. Each yellow-eyed day drops like a stone in the ocean of eternity. I built my house by the water's edge, and I watch the wind as it blows the sand, as it blows my marks from the sand. I hear the wind grieve in the eaves, worry the door, and sift up the slats of my floor. And the wind that is time and the ocean death both sing of eternal loneliness. As you listen to our interpretation today, I'd like you to pay particular attention to a theme that Laitman uses across her cycle. This opening Ocean of Eternity theme returns at different times. What does it mean to you when you hear it?
And the wind that is time, and the ocean death, singing, which lives in us. I am futures. And what then is there left to tell? That the morning of night, that we often love, the sweet, sweet touch of face and hand, despite the wind in the sand. But the wind reaps the tide and lets my own. I can hear the voices echo. They are waiting for the storm. Tossed in forgotten soul. Ashes in the wind. From our flowers shall grow, and from our bones wild flowers shall grow, wild flowers shall grow. Where the ashes fall, where the ashes fall. In the ocean of eternity, where the ashes fall, where the ashes fall. And from our bones wild flowers shall grow, wild flowers shall grow. In the ocean of eternity, in the ocean of
And go with the exhibit, and then join us back.
Oh, yeah.
Good afternoon. I'm Laurence Sherr, and I'm going to share with you some examples of my work representing and representing the Holocaust partisan songs of Sheena Ramirez. As the Bailey School of Music member of the team who collaborated on our exhibit and on our concerts, I would like to extend a welcome to our Virginia performers who are off stage now, and to our Museum of History and Holocaust Education partners, many of whom are here in the audience with us. And also would like to welcome all of you here in person and those joining us online. I would also like to express my deep appreciation to all those who have supported my Holocaust music related research and creative work, especially SNCF America and KSU. Sheena was active in the Vilna Ghetto as a writer, archivist, political activist, educator, and is one way of synthesizing these activities as a songwriter. You can find out more about him in the gallery guide of the exhibit. Petroginsky grew up in the thriving Jewish cultural and religious milieu of pre-war Vilna. The city was known as the Jerusalem of Lithuania. The Jewish population pre-war was over 27% of the total. The Nazis established a ghetto in Vilna from 1941 to 43. Of the pre-war Jewish residents, only 4 to 5% survived the Holocaust. Petroginsky himself participated in the creation and singing of songs in the ghetto. This was a very common activity among persecuted groups during the Holocaust. These songs were very often not music for entertainment, but music for witnessing and music for survival. Petroginsky fled with other Jewish partisans before the 1943 liquidation of the ghetto, and he eventually joined a Soviet partisan unit in the forests. For his fellow Jews in that unit, he created the song Yid du Partizaner by writing new lyrics to a Russian song that he likely encountered in the forest. In music, we call this a contrafactum. Petroginsky's Yiddish lyrics speak of survival and revenge, and indeed, he participated in the liberation of his home city in 1944. After the war, he continued his work by collecting and publishing songs of the Holocaust. I found Yid du Partizaner in his landmark anthology, Songs of the Ghettos and Camps. When writing my cello sonata in 2014, I chose 3 partisan songs, including 2 by Petroginsky, for the outer movements. This framing, rather than only remembering Jews as victims, tells a different story of the Jewish experience during the Holocaust. A story of fortitude and resilience, of courage and boldness, and of the active struggle against persecution and genocide. Because it is important to me to educate audiences about the lives and contributions of the writers and musicians whose work I use as historical sources, I request that my compositions be preceded by performances of those songs. This is what we're going to do for you now, with the song followed by the composition. I made a new arrangement of this song for Sheena Ramirez to present today, and she will sing the first and third verses. I rewrote the first movement of my cello sonata, especially for our guest oboe and piano performers, to premiere on today's concert. Petroginsky's Yid du Partizaner is used as the first theme of this sonata form work. The title is taken from the song's lyrics. My goal is to honor and remember Petroginsky's voice, and in doing so, not only to provide healing, but also to contribute to greater understanding, mutual respect, and tolerance in our contemporary interconnected world. Now, will you please welcome Sheena Ramirez and Jeremiah Padilla back to the stage.
Von die geht und süße Welt in die Welt freie, und Schneckete auf die Welt, so geht's ein Neue, und die Luft ist ein Freund, und wir hat uns Sachsen, mitten bis wie nicht von Heiden zu nicht gewachsen. Gott nie komme und die Sinn, wenn die Blut verschreit sie, war dem heile Kind mal gibt, viele Werte streiten, ein mir will an meiner Seite zum Mohikane, springt der Nacht die Sonnenscheine in der Partisane.
Our final offering today is In Sleep, the World is Yours, which sets poetry from Selma Meerbaum-Eisinger's collection, Harvest of Blossom. Selma was only 18 years old when she died in a Nazi labor camp, and it is truly amazing that her poetry survived at all. Selma was known to her friends as an imaginative, gregarious poet, and her piercing words belay a lavish musicality. Before being deported, she passed along her bundle of poetry to her best friend to give to her sweetheart, who was in a different Romanian labor camp. He survived the war, only to die in a shipwreck when immigrating to Palestine. Eventually, the book of poems made their way to Israel, but it was still another 30 years before they were published, thanks to the dedication of her friends and distant relatives. The last poem, Tragic, which Laurie sets as the final song in her cycle, is the most haunting in the This is the hardest, to give yourself away and then to see that no one needs you. To give all of yourself and realize you'll fade like smoke and leave no trace. I would like to highlight another theme that Laura uses across the song cycle. I invite you to ponder on the significance of this theme, which often happens when the text refers to time. While she was robbed of life and liberty, Selma did leave her trace. Her legacy touches readers across time and space, and now that voice has also been lifted in music by Lori Lee.
Sleep, my child, just fall asleep. Please sleep and don't cry anymore. Just look and sleep. The world is yours. Please don't cry so loud. Don't cry, just sleep. Close your eyes and fall asleep. Listen, the forest is rustling. In sleep, there is no hate, no sorrow. And in sleep, you are not Sleep, my darling, and smile, my child. This is the hardest. Give yourself give yourself away. Give yourself. Love no trace. And leave no trace. Leave no trace, and leave no trace.
every link of this musical chain, a memory has been used to weave a wreath. As an audience member, you will take with you to the memory of today, and with it the stories of Franz Abbas, Miroslav Kosek, Hannes Lowy, Selma Mirbaum-Eisinger, Shmerka Kaczynski, Anne Randasinga, and Nellie Sachs. Minna Miller, Director for Music of Remembrance, said, "When we commission and perform new works set in the Holocaust shadow, we're not trying to teach history, but to tell stories about people and their lives. As witnesses of horrific crimes, their poetry and their wisdom should not be forgotten. Not only do you know their stories, your memories include melodies, amplifying these words in new and glorious ways that only music can. The songs are a product of the contemplation and creativity of both Lori Laitman and Dr. Laurence Sherr. Laitman says, "My role is to tell a story through music and to share the story of those who were silenced. I approach the Holocaust poetry in the way I approach any poem or text. My goal is to create dramatic music to illuminate and magnify the meaning of the words." Dr. Sherr expands on this idea. It's not just about the poetry. It's both the poetry itself and the life of the poet. This lets people relate to the history. So in setting this music, it's not only important to have the audience experience the poetry, but to learn about the life of the poet, what they were experiencing as a form of Holocaust education. And the final threads in the wreath of memory are the performers and commissioners of these works, whose reflections and interpretations have colored what we learned about tonight. As Christine Hertzweig-Streck, soprano professor at University of Alabama, said when discussing The Secret Exit, "My role as a musician is not only to sing the music faithfully according to the composer's wishes and to clearly express the text of the poet, it is also as a social activist of sorts. People need to know what happened in fairly recent history, or we are doomed to repeat it."
Amen.
Finally, Adina Langer of the Museum of History and Holocaust Education at Kennesaw State University said it best in her accompanying exhibit, Words, Music, Memory, Representing Voices of the Holocaust. "We hope this exhibit will motivate you to find your voice and share a story, whether that story is your own or one you connected with through empathy. You can help expand the web of connections across space and time through the creative process. As a writer, artist, composer, performer, producer, or supporter, you have the power to inspire others to hear the voices of the past. These voices call on us to work to realize a better future." Thank you very much.
Thanks so much, Sheena, and thank you, Dr. Sherr, and thank you all for being here today. We are going to invite our musicians, Jeanette Zecco and Jeremiah Padilla, to come up one more time so we can all recognize their wonderful sound. And we invite you, if you're interested, to stay for a question and answer with Dr. Sherr and Sheena Ramirez. And I also want to let you know that the exhibit will be on display at the KSU Center at the Museum of History and Holocaust Education following our Q&A. And you're welcome to come over and spend a little bit more time with the exhibit. And I'll be there sharing a little bit more about the digital gallery guide that accompanies the exhibit. So we hope to see all of you either later today or in the near future. So we will bring over a couple chairs to allow our wonderful composer and performer. You have your microphone already? Thank you. So my first question is for Sheena Ramirez. So once you've selected a song to perform, how do you approach the relationship between the text and the music?
Yeah, that's a great question. So when I'm performing a piece of music, I have two responsibilities. I have responsibility to the composer to be able to relay their wishes and to show what they're trying to show in their interpretation. And then I have a duty to the text itself. So that is looking at the author, learning the history of the works, whether it's through poetry, whether it's letters, or if it's a written prose. So many texts from so many different song settings can be found in different ways, and it colors the interpretation as well as the composer's interpretation of the song. So I spend a lot of time with just contemplation of the poetry and the words on their own. And then in combination, thinking about the actual performance and really being true to what the composer has written on the page. And I try to let myself go into a space in the rehearsal room where I push the bounds of what is possible for singing in a safe environment, so that I can learn and memorize exactly what that feels like, so that when I'm in the moment, I'll have that visceral memory of what it's like to inhabit the words of the composer, to inhabit the words of the poet and that music, while then being able to take a step back, to pull myself away and focus on the artistry. Because if you're so consumed with your own impersonal experience, then you're not giving the full experience to the audience, who deserves to see the work of the poet and the composer in the full breadth of the possibilities.
Thank you so much. Yeah, that's a tough thing to do, you know, to take it in and feel all the emotions and then embody your own feeling, but without feeling it in that moment. It's a very challenging and impressive thing. So my next question is for Dr. Sherr. So you have composed pieces for vocalists as well as instrumentalists. Can you please tell me about how you view poetry and its translation into music?
Sure. I have used poetry that's been translated into English often. Nellie Sachs, for instance, wrote in German, her native language. And in some cases, I used the given translation of poetry, and in other cases, I've collaborated with our German professor to prepare translations myself. It's always a challenge when dealing with poetry to, especially poetry in a different language, to convey the full meaning. There's different ways to translate poetry. One way is to capture the rhyme and rhythm of the words, which is a very crucial part of the poetry. I have chosen in one of my works to focus on something different and to abandon the rhyme and rhythm for meaning, to have poetry, to have a translation which more closely captures the meaning of the poet, even though you might lose that aspect of rhyme and rhythm. And what I do is I not only look at the life of the poet or the writer who I'm using, but I try to find out what their circumstances were in their life at the time they wrote the poetry. What was going on just before this happened? What was going on to motivate them to write these particular words at this particular time of their life?
Thank you so much. So I'd like to open up the Q&A to you. And if anybody who has a question for either Dr. Sherr or Sheena Ramirez or myself, I can come bring the microphone over to you and give you the opportunity to ask your question. Yes, Mr. Greenblatt.
My name is Harshman Greenblatt, and I am a survivor. And for the last hour and a half, I was a 5-year-old in the displaced persons camp of Westbialik outside of Salzburg, Austria. You brought me back to a time where, after escaping of communist Russia after the war. For an hour and a half, I saw my mother singing to me because that's all she could do to bring us back to life in 1945, 1946. So I don't have a question, I just have a thank you. An hour and a half. I lay there on the ground floor of the dirt in the DP camps. So listen to my mother singing to me. So thank you, Ms. Ramirez, thank you, Dr. Sherr, and Adina, thank you for having us. It was an honor and a privilege to listen to you.
One of the themes of my dissertation that I'm writing, which is words, music, memory, an exploration of 4 soprano song cycles by Laitman set on text of victims of the Holocaust, is specifically why she chose the soprano voice to be the vessel for these particular poems. Because as I mentioned in the opening, she's actually written 10 song cycles that commemorate the Holocaust. She's written a song called Fathers, another song called Daughters. She's written an oratorio. And one of the key points that I discuss in the paper is that she chose the soprano voice because the height and the range of the instrument paired with the woodwind instrument allows the vulnerability and the innocence in that high register that colors the experience differently than what we see if it's in a darker range of the voice. So I think in particular settings of I Never Saw Another Butterfly, and then with Selma Meerbaum-Eisinger's poetry, that that's one of the really crucial parts of what sets Laurie's music apart, which I can speak to since that's the dissertation that I'm writing on. But your words are incredibly touching to me, and I'm so happy that our performance was able to bring back harsh memories, but also it sounds like beautiful memories of your mother.
Most Jewish mothers have that soprano voice, that soft, comforting voice, which 5-year-olds need.
I want to thank you as well. I've heard your story on many occasions, but it's just so wonderful to learn something new, about your experience and to be able to produce that experience for you. Is anybody else like to let me bring the microphone over?
Thank you to each and every one of you for the time, the magnificence in which you performed, and the care that you expressed in the emotion that emanated from this performance. And I wanted to ask you, but you sort of touched on that already. When you compose something, Dr. Sherr, do you have obviously in mind an instrument that you're going to allow it to come from? Did you originally intend it to be the piano and the oboe? Or?
This work was originally a cello sonata, cello and piano. And I heard the cello voice as one that could really capture the essence of the poetry. But when this collaboration came about, we didn't have a cello that was coming down from James Madison University in Virginia. And I figured out a way to transform the work so that the oboe would carry the melody. And I'll share a very nice compliment I got from Jeanette Zacco, our oboist, whose husband is also an oboist. He heard the piece and he told her, "Oh, I didn't know that it wasn't originally written for oboe." And so,
Really? Well, you did a magnificent job, all of you, and thank you so much. My mother is a Holocaust survivor, and her parents were killed in Sobibor in 1943, along with her younger sister, who was 15. And she was on the kinder transport, and her parents were on the St. Louis before that was going to Cuba, before they were sent back to Europe. And I'm writing a book right now about her experience. And this couldn't come at a better time in a way, because really touches the deepest part of my soul. So thank you so
Right.
much.
And which country did you go to on the kinder transport? Most kids were sent to England.
Right, she was in England.
Right. My mother was also, well, she survived. She's the only member of her family who survived. And she went on the kinder transport to Switzerland, which was an unusual, less usual location for kinder transport. And all her parents and her sister were captured and killed.
Ranasinga as well was. And Ranasinga, the author of Ocean of Eternity, was on a kinder transport. So to see all these threads connected and to know how the survivors who did come, how these are so meaningful is important as well.
My mother's 96 and a half. She broke her neck in February, and God bless her. She's still kicking and ticking, and she comes from really tough stock.
Well, I bet Adina would be happy to share the concert later if she's not able to watch it live stream. So maybe she can watch it later too.
I'm her husband, and I'm Jewish, and I grew up in the town that's about 85% Jewish in New York, suburb of Muncie, New York. Not very Hasidic now. But I never knew any of these stories of the kinder transport, the St. Louis, women being hidden in the woods, all these stories. So it's important because the survivors never spoke of their experiences until at least, the show on tapes. So it's important in education. And 20 minutes from here, we had 2 high schools last week that they put swastikas and Heil Hitler and all these other things in Cobb County. 100 years ago, someone was hung because they were Jewish. So it's important that the education continues long after the survivors are gone, that this never happens again. And unfortunately, the education is important. And I know that this program is available to all Cobb County students all over. So it's important that the education and things like you're doing continue. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Would anybody else like to ask a question? Sure, let me bring this over.
I'm not Jewish, but I feel so touched by what y'all done today. There were a lot of Jewish people that died during the Holocaust. I don't understand why. Only God knows why. But I'm here today. There's a voice in the wilderness saying to y'all, joy comes in the morning. Keep your heads up. Folks, joy comes in the morning. But beware. Beware. As you said, and as this gentleman just said, we could see this again if we're not careful. The people of Germany did speak up when they had an opportunity. And look what happened. Beware of where we're going today, because you see it all around you. And it's just one person saying to go today. Be careful. We could be there tomorrow. Thank y'all for what y'all did. Beautiful. Lady, your voice is just unreal. And thank you, sir, for putting it in the music. Y'all did a wonderful job. God bless all of you.
I so appreciate having everyone here. And I'd like to turn the microphone to you.
I'm not Jewish, but I survived starvation. I lived in the western part of Holland, and look, I have 2 brothers and 2 sisters, and we all survived. But still today, I just took a course, the Holy Lifelong Learning, and we talked about the camps. And one thing I didn't realize,
that there are literally hundreds of them. And I, I thought Dachau and Auschwitz, but I didn't know there were hundreds of them. And we really should remember this. I mean, this gentleman just said, I'm a little scared myself about what things that are happening. And one thing I want to mention that the Holocaust Museum, I actually didn't realize this concert was that far removed from it, the other side of the highway. Well, I really recommend to take a look at the Holocaust Museum. It is very, very interesting and very, very necessary. People really like what happened.
Well, thank you. This is Hank Mandriel, and his story is one that we're telling in the museum right now in the special exhibit. So this, it is, I hear the concern about this time, but I also want to thank all of you for sharing your stories, because that allows us in our mission of education to continue to make these connections and to directly connect with young people and put faces and voices to these stories that I think are how we do make those connections across space and time. So does anybody else have anything you want to share or questions? If not, I will say thank you so much, and invite anyone who wants to come over to the museum, and I'll be sharing some more, and you're welcome to explore, and good night. Thank you so much.
To me, when the dean told me that she was going to be him, and that not all here to witness this, it brought the